There was panic in the White House, and Trump could not figure out what he should do. In early 2025, the United States faced something it hadn't truly prepared for: an energy chokehold from its quiet, polite northern neighbor. It began with routine noise, like more tariffs, more tweets, more threats. But one line, buried deep in the flurry of economic aggression, changed everything. Energy products will be tariffed at 10%. That wasn't just a line, it was a warning. And for the power brokers behind closed doors, it wasn't a hypothetical. It was the fuse to a fuel crisis. The system that keeps America running, from trucks to jets to factories, is built on oil, which most voters don't even know comes from Canada. Over 4.3 million barrels per day. Every day. But what happens when the supplier starts talking about options? What really happened when Canada suggested it might shut the tap? In this video, let's break it down and know what shocking Trump did next. America loves illusions, and one of its most cherished is the myth of energy independence. Politicians chant it like a prayer. News anchors repeat it like gospel. But peel back the stage lights, and you will find something else entirely. A quiet, unspoken dependence buried under pipelines and refinery contracts. Because every time a truck rumbles down a highway, a jet roars over Kansas, or a factory blinks to life in Detroit, there's a silent partner in the room. And it's not Texas, it's not Saudi Arabia, it's Canada. And not just any oil, but Canadian heavy crude. This isn't just about volume, it's about chemistry. Most U.S. refineries, especially those in the Rust Belt, were re-engineered in the 90s and 2000s not for flexibility, but for specificity, to process the dense, bitumen-rich oil sands flowing down from Alberta. Texas's light sweet crude? That's not compatible. Venezuelan oil? Sanctioned and unreliable. OPEC's Middle East grades? Politically toxic. That means the entire supply chain of America's central and eastern energy infrastructure relies not just on oil from Canada, but on this specific type of oil, which is thick, sulfur-rich, and chemically suited for American refineries that can't be retooled without billions and years. Which is why, when Donald Trump returned to the White House in early 2025 and announced sweeping 25% tariffs on Canadian imports, there was one conspicuous carve-out. Energy was hit with only 10%. It wasn't a gesture of goodwill. It was a tell. The bravado of economic war paused at the border of the oil sands. Because Trump's team, and the industry behind him, understood something the American public didn't. That energy from Canada isn't an optional import. It's the foundation stone. You don't slap tariffs on the oxygen tank you are breathing from. In economic circles, this wasn't seen as a tactical move. It was seen as a preemptive concession, a blinking red light before the first punch. Trump was loud on everything, from aluminum, dairy, to steel. But when it came to oil, he softened. Because he had to. Because if that oil stopped, even for 48 hours, it wouldn't just delay supply chains, it would crack the illusion of independence. Gas prices would spike, refineries would jam, inventories would be drained, and worst of all, voters would notice. You see, oil isn't just a product, it's a price anchor. It decides how much your groceries cost, how much your Uber charges, and how much the plane ticket home bleeds from your wallet. If that price soars, everything breaks, and that's not something a president wants to happen in an election year. So yes, America talks about self-reliance, but its pipelines tell another story. And in 2025, that story was on the verge of being rewritten. The first counterpunch came in the language of diplomacy, like tariffs on apples and aluminum, wheat and washing machines. A proportional response, calibrated to match political expectations, polite, almost predictable. But diplomacy wasn't the point. A few weeks later, the real strike came, not in action, but in a single, carefully loaded sentence. Canada's foreign minister stood before a small press corps, speaking softly about trade tensions. Then, mid-sentence, she let it slip. "Of course, there's oil and gas. We've kept that in our cards." To the casual viewer, ambiguous at best. To diplomats, a tease. But to the markets, a detonation. The reaction wasn't political. It was visceral. Oil traders caught the scent immediately. Executives at refineries in Michigan and Ohio picked up the phone. Terminals in Alberta saw a spike in orders. Canadian crude futures surged 14% overnight. This wasn't speculation anymore. It was a rehearsal for panic. Because when Canada hinted at weaponizing oil, it didn't just suggest a trade move. It tapped into a structural vulnerability Washington didn't want to admit, that its energy backbone was no longer sovereign. Pipelines can't be rerouted with executive orders. Refineries can't digest different blends with patriotic speeches. The oil isn't optional. It's physiological. And the moment Canada hinted it might even consider shutting off the flow, America's industries began sweating. And it was not just a matter of the price of gas. It was diesel for trucks, jet fuel for flights, propane for heating. Every corner of the U.S. supply chain flickered. Behind closed doors, the American Petroleum Institute sent high-priority warnings to the White House. Confidential memos were passed to the Department of Energy. CEOs from ExxonMobil, Valero, and Marathon Petroleum demanded backroom briefings. Because the question was no longer, would Canada do it? It was, could America afford to find out? And here's the real twist. Canada hadn't done anything. No taps turned. No shipments delayed. Not a single pipeline valve touched. Just a suggestion, a whisper, and it was enough to push the U.S. from bold to careful, from enforcer to negotiator. Washington insiders began noticing sudden tone shifts. Press releases softened. Tariff escalation schedules slowed. Meetings that were once aggressive became technical reviews. Because one thing was now certain. If Canada ever turned whisper into action, the U.S. economy would bleed before it could even scream. The markets weren't reacting to what had happened. They were reacting to what could happen. A loaded gun doesn't need to fire to command a room. And Canada, long dismissed as the polite neighbor, had just walked in with its finger on the trigger. Interestingly, the playbook was old. The players were familiar. But the silence? That was new. Trump, true to form, responded to Canada's economic retaliation with sound bites and headlines. On stage in Florida, in front of cheering supporters, he thundered about unfair trade deals and promised to put America first again. Cameras rolled. Fox News lit up. Tweets flew. But behind the scenes, nobody in Washington was cheering. Because Canada wasn't playing the same game. Instead of threats, they spoke in hints. Instead of escalation, they offered ambiguity. And nothing unnerves a market more than the unknown. That's when Jonathan Wilkinson, Canada's energy minister, took the stage at CERAWeek, the world's most influential energy summit. He didn't rant. He didn't even raise his voice. All he said was this: "We're not looking for escalation, but we have options." 10 words. No volume. But they detonated like a bomb. Because everyone in that room understood what options meant. It meant oil, the 4.3 million barrels per day flowing south into the United States. It meant pipelines built to run only one way. It meant decades of refinery designs dependent on Canadian chemistry. It meant that the thing too integrated to break was suddenly no longer guaranteed. Markets reacted instantly. The price spread between Western Canadian Select, WCS, and West Texas Intermediate, WTI, collapsed, a historic indicator of impending crisis. WCS, normally discounted due to its heavier nature, surged in demand. U.S. refiners panicked and started stockpiling. Buyers from Michigan to Louisiana put in double orders. The American Petroleum Institute began issuing classified briefings. Back-channel communications between CEOs and national security advisors became daily rituals, because the subtext of Wilkinson's words was unmistakable. "We don't need to pull the trigger. Just showing you we're armed is enough." For decades, the US-Canada energy relationship was treated like a natural law, beyond politics, beyond economics, more like gravity. You didn't question it, because to question it was to destabilize the foundation beneath the North American economy. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on the latest news stories on geopolitics, economics, and current affairs impacting your lives. In March 2025, gravity was suspended, not by action, but by threats. This wasn't just about oil. This was about perception. And Canada was executing a flawless demonstration of something America rarely encounters on its own turf: quiet leverage. Canada didn't need to win a war. They only needed to show they could wage one. And that terrified Washington more than anything Trump could scream from a podium. Because deep inside the halls of power, people weren't asking whether Canada would shut off the tap. They were asking, what if they actually can? And suddenly, all of Trump's tariffs, all his bluster, all the rallies and slogans, they felt like noise. Because the system's real pressure point had nothing to do with speeches. It had to do with pipes. As the psychological war unfolded between Washington and Ottawa, and oil traders clutched every syllable from Canadian officials like scripture, a strange thing happened. The bluff began to crack, and it didn't crack from the outside. It cracked from within, in Alberta, the oil heartland and the province responsible for over 80% of Canada's oil production. It's home to the sands, the pipelines, and the only reason Canada has any leverage at all in an energy war. If Ottawa held the pen, Alberta held the barrel. And Alberta wasn't on board. Premier Danielle Smith wasn't interested in diplomatic posturing or economic brinkmanship. She didn't need to whisper. She said it flat out: cutting exports to the United States is unacceptable. Alberta will not support it. It wasn't a rebellion. It was realism. Because while Ottawa flexed its geopolitical muscles, Alberta's calculus was much colder. Survival. The province's entire economy, from jobs to revenue to growth, runs on one equation. Oil goes south. The US isn't just a trading partner, it's the only buyer. Over 97% of Canada's oil exports flow into the American market, not Europe, not Asia. The US. There's no pipeline to Beijing, no fleet of supertankers waiting off Vancouver, no domestic refining system that can handle its own supply at scale. The system was built over decades to run in one direction. The money, the infrastructure, the politics, all of it moves south. So when Ottawa whispered about options, Alberta saw something different. It saw a suicide note. To Alberta, threatening to weaponize oil wasn't a strategy. It was a hostage situation, with both the captor and the captive in the same room. Canada had leverage, yes, but only as long as it never used it. Once the tap turned, everyone lost. And that's what traders started seeing too. Markets may run on fear, but they are priced on reality. And the reality was becoming obvious. Even if Ottawa wanted to pull the trigger, Alberta would stop them. The bluff was built on federal unity, and that unity didn't exist. Back in Washington, relief was quiet but noticeable. The threat of a supply shutdown had pushed the US to the brink, not because it happened, but because it could. Now, with Alberta publicly breaking ranks, the threat looked less like a gun and more like a prop. This fracture within Canada didn't just de-escalate the crisis, it exposed the structural limits of economic warfare in a democracy. You can't bluff with a resource you don't fully control. You can't threaten your neighbor when your own house is on fire. The illusion shattered quietly. No headlines, no emergency summits. Just a few sentences, a few market corrections, and a collective exhale. But the damage was done, not in barrels or budgets, but in trust. Ottawa had shown a willingness to weaponize its most sacred alliance. And Alberta had shown the world that the weapon had a safety lock. So as the taps stayed open and the tankers kept flowing, a new tension settled in. What happens next time? Because this round, the bluff unraveled. Next round, the trigger might be real. When the dust finally settled in late April 2025, nothing looked broken. Gas still flowed. Pipelines still pulsed. Trucks still moved. Planes still flew. On the surface, the system looked intact. Just another global spat avoided at the last minute. But beneath the calm was a revelation no one could ignore anymore. The world had just watched the United States get cornered by its quietest neighbor. Not by nukes, not by cyber attacks, not even by diplomatic sanctions, by logistics. For decades, the U.S. held the illusion that energy independence meant pumping enough oil from Texas and drilling enough shale from the Dakotas to stand alone. But April 2025 shattered that myth with the most elegant weapon of all: reality. Because America didn't just need oil, it needed Canadian oil. And when Canada, the polite neighbor with the snow and smiles, even hinted it might weaponize that dependency, the entire house of cards swayed. Markets moved, presidents panicked, voters blinked. And in the middle of it all, the world realized something else too. Power has shifted. Not just from west to east, or from oil-rich autocrats to green energy lobbies, but from overt weapons to supply chain threats. The future won't be shaped by who has more tanks or more warheads. It will be shaped by who controls what others cannot live without: pipes, ports, minerals, lithium, gas valves, chips, grids. Canada had always been seen as a middle power, stable, quiet, and polite. But when it held the United States by the throat without ever closing its fist, it became something else entirely. A case study in 21st century power. And it's not just Canada. Every country watching, from Germany to India to Brazil, saw the real lesson. In the age of economic interdependence, the new weapons are invisible. And the strongest nation is the one no one can afford to offend. For the U.S., this was humbling. The empire built on self-reliance realized just how many of its arteries cross borders it doesn't control. The pipelines from Alberta, the semiconductors from Taiwan, the rare earths from China, the labor from Latin America, the lithium from Bolivia. The fortress had more doors than it wanted to admit, and none of them locked from the inside. So when Canada kept the oil flowing, when Carney cooled the rhetoric, when Alberta refused to collapse the system, it wasn't mercy. It was mercy with a memory. Because next time, it might not be a bluff. Next time, it might not come from Canada. Next time, someone might really shut it off. And when that day comes, no tariff, no tweet, no press conference will be fast enough to stop what follows. Because the truth isn't buried in headlines. It's buried in infrastructure. The system that powers your phone, your fridge, your freedom. It's only as strong as the hands that feed it. And in 2025, for one breathless moment, those hands trembled. And the world realized, the map hasn't changed, but power has. What do you think will happen if, next time, Canada doesn't bluff and the oil taps really close? Do you feel that America just dodged a bullet or delayed the inevitable? In the comment section below, share your thoughts on the fact that if one pipeline can trigger panic in Washington, what other so-called untouchable systems are just illusions? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring the latest news stories on geopolitics, economics, changing world order, and current affairs. things you need to stay informed. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.